Arya Sullivan paused outside the chipped wooden door of her apartment building, her breath visible in the cold morning air. The narrow street buzzed with the usual city noise, honking cars, distant sirens, and the murmur of hurried footsteps, but none of it reached her ears. She clutched a wrinkled coffee cup as if it could ground her, the bitter warmth barely cutting the chill settling deep into her bones. Inside the dim lobby, peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights did little to lift the building's tired spirit. It was a place that had endured decades, like the people who lived within it, clinging on through better days and worse, through laughter and despair. Arya knew each creak of the floor and every worn stair as familiarly as the lines on her hands. Yet today, the walls seemed colder, stranger, as if they recognized the storm brewing in her heart. At the front desk, Mr. Caldwell stood tall, his tailored suit and sharp eyes an imposing contrast to the building's decay. His presence demanded attention, his gaze sharp and unyielding. He was the landlord, a man who viewed the tenants not as neighbors but as numbers on a ledger. To Arya, he was the gatekeeper of her existence here, the final arbiter of her right to call this place home. "Miss Sullivan," he said without a hint of warmth, his voice slicing through the quiet like a blade. "Your rent is 3 months overdue. If you don't have the payment by the end of today, you'll have to leave." Arya's stomach knotted, the weight of her situation settling heavily around her shoulders. She swallowed hard, eyes searching his face, desperate for mercy but finding none. This moment marked a threshold, between past survival and an uncertain future, and with a heavy heart, she stepped back into the cold, the door closing behind her with a finality that echoed in the empty hall. The wind bit through Arya's thin jacket as she stood on the cracked sidewalk, staring back at the faded building where she had lived for years. She could still hear Mr. Caldwell's voice ringing in her ears, rigid and cold as the winter air. "If you don't have the payment by the end of today, you'll have to leave." Those words were more than an ultimatum, they were a verdict sealed without trial. Neighbors began to step outside, curious eyes fixed on the scene. Some looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the tension, while others trembled with a quiet fury they dared not voice. Among them was Mrs. Trout, an elderly woman who often left small meals on Arya's doorstep. Her face crinkled with worry and sympathy, but she said nothing, knowing her limited means offered little support. Nearby, a young man named Danny watched intently, clenched fists betraying his frustration. Arya turned her gaze from the building, swallowed by emotion she couldn't name: shame, anger, fear. The city's chaos felt overwhelming now, a reminder that she was one more vulnerable soul in an unforgiving machine. With trembling hands, she clutched a battered tote bag packed with a few belongings, the weight of uncertain nights pressing heavily on her. Her first shelter was a crowded, noisy place where privacy was a luxury denied. The cots were hard and cramped, the hum of weary whispers filled the air. Yet, Arya settled there with reluctant acceptance, determined to find footing despite the slipping ground beneath her. Mornings stretched into frigid afternoons spent working extra shifts, each paycheck swallowed by rent and necessities before it could ease her growing debt. Conversations with other tenants shared over thin walls revealed a ripple of whispers about her eviction. "You should have paid," some said in passing, voices tight with judgment. Others simply ignored her existence, treating Arya as if she were a ghost haunting forgotten corridors. The isolation cut deeper than the cold nights. One shift, as Arya wiped down counters at the cafe where she bartended, her mind drifted to the community she had left behind. The familiar faces of neighbors now seemed distant memories, replaced by strangers who eyed her with suspicion or indifference. A coworker's offhand remark stung: "People like you don't usually make it." The words echoed long after the laughter died. Yet, among the gray monotony, small rays of kindness flickered. Mrs. Trout's quiet gestures, a sandwich slipped into Arya's hand when no one watched, a pat on the shoulder, became lifelines. Danny sometimes saved his break to sit near her, sharing stories of dreams unfulfilled yet burning bright. These connections, fragile as they were, reminded Arya that she was not truly alone. Evenings brought the briefest moments of peace. A stroll through the busy streets, the sounds of the city weaving a strange kind of comfort. Arya often found herself pausing across from the old apartment building, watching the windows flicker with life, families, couples, individuals, each one a world apart from her own. Her heart ached with the knowledge that she no longer belonged. "And you think it's fair?" Danny's question pulled her from her thoughts. They sat on a cold bench beneath flickering street lamps. Arya looked at him, appreciating his reluctant compassion. "No," she admitted quietly. "But fairness has nothing to do with this building anymore. It's money. Rent's money, always money." His gaze hardened. "They don't see you. They see dollars. Maybe it's time you showed them something else." His words sparked a flicker of something deep inside Arya, perhaps hope or defiance, though she dared not define it yet. As weeks turned into months, Arya's world contracted and expanded in strange ways. The loss of her home was a constant ache, but it also became a crucible for growth. Each morning brought the challenge of healing bruised pride and scraping together sustenance. Each night, she wrestled with exhaustion and the gnawing question, how long before she lost herself entirely? News traveled fast among tenants. The building faced a new upheaval, a planned sale by Mr. Caldwell's company, rumored to pave the way for a pricey redevelopment. People whispered about looming evictions and displacement, their anxious eyes darting to the windows where light sometimes went dark much earlier than usual. Arya felt that news strike like a physical blow. Here was a chance to return, to reclaim a piece of the community ripped from her grasp. But it also meant walking back into the lion's den, the man whose cold dismissal had sent her spiraling into uncertainty. Each call from the shelter volunteer, each visit to social services, reminded Arya of the fragility tethered to her existence. Yet she refused to let resentment poison her entirely. In scribbled notes and late-night journal entries, she plotted a way forward, one that might, just might, allow her to turn the tide. Amid the shuffling faces and mounting pressures, Arya found clarity. The very building that had cast her out now stood vulnerable, and with that vulnerability came an unexpected opportunity. She wasn't certain how she would rise, nor what obstacles awaited, but beneath the layers of fear and fatigue one truth grew: she would return, stronger, on her own terms. Looking skyward on a cloud-washed night, Arya breathed deep and quietly asked herself, what if I could decide who belongs here? Who gets to stay, and who goes? A bitter smile touched her lips. It was a dangerous thought, but also a flicker of power she hadn't felt in years. The city hadn't crushed her yet. Maybe it never would. Have you ever faced a moment where judgment from others felt like the heaviest burden? What did you do to reclaim your own strength? Years had folded over Arya Sullivan like pages turning in a book she barely recognized. The girl who once clung to tattered hope on cold benches had grown into a confident woman, her spirit keen and unyielding beneath the polish of success. Now the founder of a thriving design firm, Arya lived in a glass-paneled loft several neighborhoods away, surrounded by the hum of creativity and accomplishment. Yet beneath the sharp lines of her penthouse apartment and the steady beat of her busy life, shadows lingered, ghosts of self-doubt seated in past hardship. She sat by the large window, tracing the city skyline as rain smeared silver streaks across glass, thinking of the old apartment building on the edge of the neighborhood. The one where she had once lived, and been cast out, left to wander the margins of society. In the months after her eviction, she'd poured herself into work, dug her hands deep into opportunity, and was surprised to find herself gathering strength where she had expected to find only loss. What she'd feared, the crushing weight of failure, hadn't broken her entirely. Yet no matter how many board meetings she chaired, how many clients applauded her vision, a fragment of that girl remained. The one who feared she wasn't enough for the world's eye, who questioned if her success was fleeting, a fragile bubble ready to burst. As she sipped coffee one crisp morning, her phone buzzed with a news alert: the apartment complex was up for sale. The article detailed rumors swirling among tenants, plans for redevelopment, likely eviction notices to come. The building was still managed by Mr. Caldwell, whose name sent an uneasy shiver down Aria's spine. He had tightened his grip over the years, stepping up rent inspections, enforcing stricter rules with a kind of mechanical cruelty that made tenants whisper about leaving before being forced out. Aria's fingers tightened around her phone. The sense of injustice, once simmering quietly beneath the surface, flared into something hotter, more urgent. She knew that even though she lived in a world far removed from crumbling hallways and overdue rent notices, the ghosts of those days remained alive for the residents who still called that building home. Her mind wandered to Danny, the young man who had been one of the few allies during her darkest times. She had lost touch over the years, but she couldn't erase the image of his clenched fists, persistent hope, and the unspoken promise that they were better than what circumstances had imposed on them. What was happening to him now? To Mrs. Trout, still aging in the building? Were they bracing for displacement, just as she had been pushed out all those years ago? That evening, tucked away in the brushed steel and glass of her office, Aria researched the building's ownership. Mr. Caldwell's name kept appearing, still firmly in control, still playing the role of cold landlord. She knew that the chance to purchase the complex had come and gone before, but this sale was different. It was public, open to bidders. Here was an opportunity not only to return but to reshape the place she once called home. Yet, alongside rising determination, self-doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest. Could she really confront Caldwell, the man who had once kicked her out? More importantly, did she have the right? Was it fair to disrupt the lives of those still living there, even if with good intentions? Her heart tugged toward justice and compassion, but her mind warned that power could corrupt, that she could become what she had most despised. Late into the night, she wrestled with these questions. She pulled out a worn notebook she kept, the pages filled with scribbles, reminders, and long-term goals. At the bottom of a page, a simple phrase stood out: change starts with one step. It was a mantra she clung to, the catalyst she needed. In the days that followed, Aria reached out quietly, old contacts, attorneys, financial advisors. She explored whether buying the building was feasible, and it was. With her current capital and a prudent loan, it could be done. But that was the easy part compared to what lay ahead. She began to hear from tenants through social media groups and scattered phone calls. Stories arrived, stories of fear, promises broken, and protests ignored. Some cried out for help, clutching affordability like a lifeline they could no longer find. The more she listened, the clearer her purpose became. Aria also realized the scale of her challenge. Mr. Caldwell was a fixture of the neighborhood, boasting deep relationships and a reputation that carried weight among city officials and investors. He was far from an easy opponent. Her return, in his eyes, would be more than a financial maneuver. It would be a challenge to his authority. One afternoon, as Aria was deep in conversation with a real estate agent, the topic turned inevitably to Caldwell. The agent's tone was pragmatic, even cynical. Caldwell is tough. He's got every advantage: money, influence, long-standing connections. He won't sell lightly, not to someone he sees as problematic. Aria smiled thinly. I suppose the question is whether that matters. Her voice had an edge, the same grit that had carried her through eviction to this very point. That evening, she sat alone in her apartment, flicking through photos on her phone, images of the community she'd lost, faces of families and neighbors she'd once relied on, frozen moments of laughter and shared hardship. The realization settled like a stone in her chest: this wasn't just a chance for revenge or restitution, it was a chance for healing. For restoring dignity, and for setting something new in motion. Yet the stakes loomed larger than ever. Could she negotiate this without losing herself? Did she have the courage to step back through those doors knowing the pain that once awaited her? There was a rich irony that the building which had so thoroughly rejected her now might be within her grasp. She closed her eyes, imagining the moment she would finally return, standing in the lobby, no longer vulnerable, no longer a guest but an owner empowered to make decisions. She saw herself meeting the tenants who had remained, those who had watched her leave and those who had been forced out themselves. Each story would matter, and with it, the difficult choices she'd have to face. As the city lights shimmered through the window, a quiet resolve steadied in her heart. Failure was no longer an option, not now. Not after all she had endured and accomplished. The building could still be a home. It could still hold hope. But first, she had to step inside again. When have you faced a moment where doubt threatened to halt your progress? How did you find the strength to move forward, even when the path seemed uncertain? Arya Sullivan's hand trembled slightly as she grasped the door handle of the leasing office within the building that had once been her home. The faded brass plaque gleamed softly in the muted light, names of past managers long forgotten, but the place felt charged with memories she could hardly put into words. Clad in a simple coat and low-key sneakers, she had carefully arranged her appearance to avoid recognition. The years had changed her in countless ways, but here she was, returning not as the struggling tenant she once was, but as a woman poised to rewrite the rules. The lobby smelled of aged carpet and stale air, and as she stepped inside, a few tenants glanced up, their expressions flickering with cautious curiosity. Whispers rippled through the space like a breeze, the tension palpable. Rumors of the building's sale had already spread fast, igniting unease and speculation about the future. Arya's heartbeat steadied. She had come prepared. A man behind the front desk looked up, Mr. Caldwell. His eyes sharpened immediately at the sight of her, flicking over her features with a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. The suit he wore was impeccable, tailored for power, the world-weary lines of his face sharpened by the stress of negotiations and battles fought outside these walls. "Miss Sullivan," he said, voice low and cautious, lips curling into a thin, wary smile. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." Arya met his gaze without flinching, offering a measured nod. "I came to discuss the building," she replied evenly, pulling a file from her bag. "I'm the highest bidder." The room seemed to still in that moment, the murmuring tenants falling silent. Mr. Caldwell's brow knit in a tight frown, a flicker of unease betraying his composed exterior. "You must be mistaken," he said, though the edge in his voice suggested otherwise. "There's no way, you?" Arya reached into the file and produced a thick check made out to the property management company, an undisputed sum sufficient to buy the entire complex. A quiet gasp swept through the onlookers. "You can't be serious," Caldwell said, voice rigid. "Do you understand what you're getting into? This building is complicated. It's not just an investment, it's a community, with people who rely on stability." "Exactly," Arya said, holding her ground. "That's why I'm here. To make sure those people matter." Tenants exchanged glances filled with hope and disbelief. Some approached cautiously, their voices hushed but urgent. Mrs. Trout's eyes glistened behind thick glasses, and Danny's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, silently echoing the collective wish for change. Caldwell's expression darkened. "You think you can waltz back in and decide who stays and who goes? This building has rules and contracts." His gaze hardened as he looked around at the tenants. "People here don't want disruption." Arya's voice grew firmer, the steel edge unmistakable. "I'm not here to make this easy, or to please everyone. But the current system has failed these residents. I will listen, and I will be fair. That's more than you've ever done." The tension in the room thickened, a fragile electric charge of possibility and uncertainty. Arya took a breath, then announced, "I will be meeting with each tenant personally, hearing their stories, and together we'll decide who can stay, with dignity intact." Surprised murmurs spread. Some tenants felt anger lingered in their chests, resentment at past hardships. Others saw a fragile chance for redemption for their community. That evening, Arya walked through the hallways, older and younger faces peering out at her with suspicion and hope. Each apartment held a world, a story of struggle and survival. Her determination was resolute, but so was the knowledge that the journey ahead would test every ounce of her empathy and strength. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It was Caldwell, terse and warning. You should know, this isn't going to be smooth. There are people who see you as a threat, don't underestimate what you're up against. Arya smiled faintly, closing the door behind her. The warning only sharpened her resolve. The complex hummed with unrest, and as she prepared for the meetings ahead, Arya felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Not just as a bidder or a former tenant, but as someone who might alter the future for better or worse. The moment was finally at hand, a crossroads where power met justice. Would Arya's vision of fairness survive the inevitable conflicts? Could she, once rejected, now become the guardian of a home for others? For those watching, the outcome was uncertain. But one thing was clear, Arya Sullivan had returned not just to claim a building, but to reclaim dignity and hope. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where returning meant confronting your past, and those who wronged you? How would you balance justice and compassion in deciding who deserves a second chance? The morning light filtered weakly through the smudged window panes of the apartment complex's meeting room, casting long shadows across the worn wooden table where Arya Sullivan sat, surrounded by tenants from every floor. Faces once marked by hesitation now showed a mixture of cautious hope and wary expectation. The decision she was about to make wasn't simply a matter of property ownership, it was a judgment on people's lives, their stories, their struggles woven tightly into the fabric of this aging building. Arya's voice was steady as she addressed the group. I know many of you have suffered under Mr. Caldwell's management. I've heard your concerns, your fears. Today, I want to assure you that I am here to listen first and act with fairness. She paused, scanning the room. Some choices will be difficult. Not everyone can stay, but I promise those decisions will be made with respect and empathy. Mr. Caldwell sat off to the side, his posture rigid, bitterness clinging to his features. His whispered protests about contracts, legal rights, and financial sheets were met with polite but firm resistance by Arya's team, legal advisors and community organizers who had grown to respect her resolve and vision. One by one, tenants spoke, sharing stories of unexpected illness, job loss, or personal tragedies that had landed them in precarious situations. Mrs. Trout, her voice trembling but steady, recounted decades of living here, the place where her late husband had worked on the grounds, the only home she'd ever known. Danny, now a young father, spoke of his efforts to rebuild his life and provide for his family despite setbacks. Their testimonies painted a poignant picture of survival, resilience against the odds. Arya listened, taking notes, her heart heavy with the knowledge that no list of criteria could fully capture the human complexity she faced. Her early doubts resurfaced. Was she ready to be the one who decided who belonged here? But the determination that had carried her this far shone brighter than fear. In conversations with tenants, she offered opportunities for arranging payment plans, community projects, and mutual support systems to foster a stronger, united residence. She saw walls come down where suspicion had thrived and hopes ignite where despair had lingered. Meanwhile, Mr. Caldwell's resistance grew desperate. Secret meetings and late-night calls aimed at swaying city officials threatened to complicate the sale. But the tenants, newly galvanized under Arya's leadership, banded together to advocate for their rights. The shift was palpable, the power balance was changing. At a community gathering in the courtyard, bathed in the soft glow of string lights, Arya addressed the crowd. This building can be more than bricks and mortar, it can be a home, a place where people live with dignity and support. None of this would be possible without your courage to stand together. The applause was genuine, resonating through the cool evening air. For the first time in years, a sense of belonging blossomed among the residents. As days turned into weeks, the difficult decisions were made thoughtfully, allowing most to remain while providing assistance and transition plans for others. The building underwent modest renovations focused on safety and comfort rather than profit-driven luxury, prioritizing tenant needs. Mr. Caldwell's reputation suffered irreparable damage. His allies distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the man who had lost not just a building, it was clear he had lost the community's trust. His once commanding presence faded, a defeat more profound than any financial loss. Arya stood on the rooftop one clear morning, overlooking the complex now alive with voices and life. The weight of past pain had lifted, replaced by a quiet pride in what she and the community had achieved together. The building was no longer just a place on a map, it was a symbol of resilience, hope, and shared humanity. In her pocket, her phone buzzed softly with messages from tenants thanking her, stories of renewed stability, and invitations to community events. Her journey from eviction to empowerment felt like a full circle, one shaped not by vengeance, but by kindness and fairness. As sun warmed her face, Arya whispered to herself, "Home isn't just where you live, it's where you're valued." If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales about resilience and the human spirit. See you in our next story.